Hello and welcome to Chicanime. My name is Lauren, and today I am going to be looking at an AniNews special video. This one is Overlord's items, tiers, dungeons, currency, customization explained. Basically, how Yggdrasil worked. So I've been watching sort of a back and forth between Overlord explained and cut content, but people have suggested that I mostly focus on the Overlord explained videos first and like go through some of like who all the characters are, how all of the systems and such works, and that will give me a better understanding, especially later when we are going into things that were cut. So that is what I will do while I'm doing Overlord content. I'll hang out in this Overlord explained playlist for a little bit. If you want to see some other I mean, I'll still be with I'll still look at Zoranic Kaiba's videos. I'll still look at Sheltier's Servants. I'll still look at some of these other creators as well. But for the AniNews segments, I'll be mostly focusing on this Overlord explained playlist. Keep giving me suggestions. Aluminum Brain over on Patreon has been giving me quite a lot of suggestions, and I have really appreciated that. So thank you again so much for being a patron. If you want to support the channel, that is a good way to do it. You know, you get some early content for the anime videos. You get those uncut and significantly early. There was some stuff on the Patreon right now that I have no idea if or when it'll get to YouTube. So, you know, Alec and I are watching Kaiju number 8. That is going to be exclusively on Patreon for right now. Jessica and I are watching Spice and Wolf. That's going to be exclusively on Patreon for a while. You know, we've got the movie. Jessica and I just watched Dr. Dolittle. We had 4 a patron suggested. We've got some Will and Grace going up soon. So we have some stuff that is going to be pretty exclusive to Patreon if you're interested in that. And if you aren't really feeling able to do that right now, just leave a like, comment, subscribe. All of those things do help us out a lot. So, and don't forget to check out our other channels. We've got Americans Learn, where we talk about music and science and history and comedy and all sorts of fun stuff over there. We got Chicago Reacts, where it's there's a lot of stuff. There's too many things on the Chicago Reacts thing to actually talk about it. A lot of gaming stuff over there, but there's quite a bit. But like I said, right now we're going into Overlord's items and tiers, dungeons, currency, and customization. We're gonna learn how Yggdrasil worked and why it's different in the new world. Maybe.
And we wrapped up Yggdrasil now so that next week, I think it's about time we wrapped up Yggdrasil now so that next week we can get into the character profile videos. A quick recap though, in case this is your first time watching one of these videos. In our first one, we went over the general information of Yggdrasil as a game, as well as the creation and customization of characters. And in the second one, we took a look at the leveling and tier magic system, as well as how casting mechanics worked. And now I'll just try to put together all the other miscellaneous information, starting with some more stuff about the world. As you'd expect from any fantasy RPG, dungeons also lay hidden throughout each of the 9 realms, but they're most definitely not the type of dungeon that you'd expect. Imagine the entire game of Dark Souls as a single dungeon. Now, that may be an over-exaggeration in terms of size, but each one was said to be absolutely massive and contain various types of biomes within a single one. So there could be both an ever-extending swampland and a vast desert in the same dungeon. Wandering into a dungeon, or even just doing one without any preparation, was something that would most likely end up leading to a very quick death. That's because, as you explored farther away from the central area of the world, the harder everything became. This is a relatively standard concept for a game of this type, where the higher level areas are at the very outskirts of the world. But considering how massive each world was, and the lack of borders indicating the level requirements for each area, it'd be pretty hard to determine how skilled you needed to be in order to know that you can successfully traverse an area. But not only did the monsters become stronger, the terrain itself became a threat if you weren't properly equipped. It would have been like...
Oh, and that would be so mean, too. Oh, no. Especially if there isn't, like, any kind of clear delineation and just, like, you're fine one day and the next day you're, like, dead because it's like, oh, wait, what? But it was okay.
I think traveling into Goron City without any flame resistance in Breath of the Wild. Some were so difficult that 36-man raiding parties called legions were required, and guilds were able to join forces in order to attempt to defeat it together. Sharing the loot with another guild, though, may not have been the most appealing aspect to many players. Being the first to clear a dungeon meant having 10% more loot spawn and offered higher leveled equipment as a reward. Then there were the guild-based dungeons, where the reward for clearing it was gaining ownership and occupation over it. As you already know, the Great Tomb of Nazarick is one of these dungeons. Though it was one of the more difficult simultaneous attack dungeons, it wasn't the hardest. There existed 9 dungeons, 1 per realm, and these allowed for NPC data storage of up to 3,000 levels.
Oh, that's cool.
You see, guild bases were dungeons that had levels embedded into it. The number of levels dictated the maximum combined level of custom NPCs that you could have to defend your base. And usually, the harder the dungeon was, the more levels of NPC data storage it would have. Of course, you could upgrade the amount of levels that your base had by paying for it, like they did with the Great Tomb of Nazarick, but to find one with 3,000 levels already was limited to 1 per realm. You also weren't able to claim multiple dungeons at once and divide your bases up either. If you came across a guild-based dungeon with a higher level that you wanted, you would first have to leave the other one. One more component to guild bases
you know what? I feel like that makes sense. You don't want to be able to like grow too much. You gotta keep it fun and fair, right?
The maintenance costs. Everything from the creation of NPCs to the base's defenses required serious financing. If you ever wanted to hinder a guild financially, then attempting to raid their base would be your best bet, since immediately re-establishing traps, repairing damages, and reviving NPCs all cost gold. You were allotted a certain sum of damage that could be repaired for free every day, but that would take a significant amount of time to bring everything back to its original state, so the fastest way to just fix everything was to just pay for it. Which brings us to the game's currency.
That makes sense.
So along with managing the guild-based defense system,
I try not to pay to play anything, but every so often, I'll be like, but I just need a little, I just like, it's gotten me once or twice. I've upgraded something that it gets me sometimes. It's like, and by sometimes I mean like twice. I think I've put some money into a game like that. I'm just, I try not to, but sometimes my will is bad.
System and summoning or reviving NPCs, gold can also be used to cast certain spells and of course buy or craft in-game items. Alongside gold was also data crystals. They occasionally dropped as loot from killed monsters, and these were little data storage items that enabled every aspect of customization in the game. If you weren't already aware, customization was this game's bread and butter. Data crystals in combination with a separately purchasable creator tool allowed for pretty much unlimited in-game cosmetic customization. Everything from the color, shape, and style of your chestplate to the flavor text data and appearance of golden XP drops, you name it. If it was a visible feature in the game, it was most likely customizable. Created NPCs had an even greater degree of customization because you could design them and make their build any way that you could imagine. Their personalities would be detailed in their backstory, and their appearances and abilities were dictated by your choice of racial and class levels. And all this was possible so long as you had enough data crystals to do so. For example, Tabula had used so much of Nazarick's free data capacity with the designs of his NPCs that other guild members had started to complain about it. He was forced to end up using cash items in order to give himself more data to work with. So the more customization you did, the more data storage you'd need, and therefore, data crystals became just as or even more important than gold. Though it's not only for pimping out your armor so you can flex on everyone else. Enhancing certain gear or crafting magical items was also possible with high-level data crystals. If you were lucky enough to come across a high-level data crystal, you could upgrade an item to the highest class, though that item had to already meet some rather rare requirements first. When it came to items, data crystals were the very essence of them. Items were actually dropped in the form of data crystals. That way they could customize the way the item looked, all while keeping the in-game stats the same.
Oh, that's really cool. I like that.
Or infuse the data crystal into the item's skin. So long as the item had enough data capacity, you could put however many data crystals into it. This is actually a fairly clever way of allowing personal design of your equipment without it having affect any of your abilities as a player.
Yeah,
just
that's
imagine
really
someone
cool.
dressing themselves up in rookie gear or like a no skin, but have the most insane stats inserted into it. That would be a pretty funny way of trolling some PKers.
Yeah.
So if we look into the items now, this should help you understand a bit more how data crystals.
It's sort of like how I kind of want to see like a really twinky Superman. Like, I mean, and I don't mean like, the Superman from Superman and Lois who was he's slim. I mean, I want a twinky Superman. I'll show you the guy that I'm specifically thinking of. It's from Holy Musical Batman, Star Kid. But like Brian Holden, was an amazing Superman in it, but like, look at him. Look, he's so skinny. I just want the twinkiest of Batmans. I just think it's funny. Look at him. Anyway, that's what I want. I want a twinkie Superman. Either that or just like a good old boy Superman. Someone, like, I just think that would also be kind of fun. Just like, I don't stop with the big fridge thing. He gets his power from the sun. He can look like anything.
And data capacity play a significant role in power levels. As I'm sure you already know, items have different ranks that range from the weakest in the low tier all the way up to the strongest in the divine tier. Then in between you have middle, high, top, legacy, relic, and legendary. These ranks were given based on the item's data size, so the more data an item had, the higher rank that item would be. And an item's data size was determined by the materials that the item was made out of. The more rare the world metals and minerals were, the greater the data capacity, which made adventuring a prominent aspect of the game. If you wanted that diamond sword, well, you better start strip mining because you'd have to channel your inner Minecraft and find those rare resources. But once you had those resources, you could create a large data capacity item and stack a fair number of data crystals into it, hopefully bringing it up into that divine class tier. Though the rare metals and high level data crystals were so far and few between that it was an achievement to even have a single divine class item. Unless of course you had the money to spend on trying to roll for one through the game's gacha system. Within the Tomb of Nazarick, there are around 14 known divine class items, most of which we actually saw Ainz use in his battle against Shaltir. This includes Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi, formerly used by Nishiki, Female Sensei's Iron Fist of Wrath from Tamaiko, Hoyi's bow from Peroroncino, the giant meat cleaver called Suck the Blood and Eat the Flesh, and Takemikazuchi's Takemikazuchi Mark 8. A few of the Guardians also have their own, including Albedo's Hermes Trismegistus armor, Shaltir's Spewit Lance, Mare's Shadow of Yggdrasil, and Cocytus's God-slaying Emperor Blade. Then there's other items like the Ring of Ainz Uogon, and the gacha item Shooting Star. Exceeding the divine category though are the exclusive guild weapons and world or world champion items. Guild weapons are the singular representation of the existence of your guild. This was the item that needed to be crafted with the most care because it was allowed to have a significant amount of data storage attached to it, far surpassing that of the divine class and approaching that of the world class. But once again, the data capacity of this weapon was determined by the crafting resources used and the skill of the crafter. Even if this weapon was poorly designed and crafted, it would still have significant power over the divine class items. The thing about the guild weapon though is that if this weapon was destroyed or broken by any means, it would signify the end of your guild. Your guild would essentially be disbanded and your entire member list would gain a title shaming you as a symbol of failure for being unable to protect the core item of your guild. Then there are the world items, which are so ridiculously overpowered that they actually break the mechanics of the game. Or at least they're capable of overriding various fundamental game mechanics in order to change the very system of it. Some devs thought it would be a good idea to create wildcard items that anyone could stumble across and use to just become Kirito temporarily and ignore any facet of game balance. I'm not even joking about that, by the way. One item called Ouroboros can be used to make direct contact with the devs of Yggdrasil and request for one wish to be implemented in the game. It's actually quite funny how this world item was used in the light novel, but I think I'll save that story and the rest of the world items and their abilities for a separate video. They're just too ridiculous to not talk about separately. Anyway, the only way to know godlike items were to either have one of your own or have a special job class. But with regards to how they fit into the game, before the world tree had been attacked by a monster and left with only 9 leaves to represent each of the 9 realms, there once were many leaves that covered it. But after the monster had eaten a majority of those leaves, the remnants of them, totaling a number of 200, were said to have been scattered across the remaining 9 in the form of the world items, each carrying the power of a world inside of them. World champion items, on the other hand, were very similar in power to guild weapons. Only 9 existed in Yggdrasil though, one of which was Touch Me's armor. They were given as gifts directly from the admins to the winners of a martial tournament. Being a world
cool. I'm really glad that I didn't pause to ask because I was like, wait, how did he manage to get them? They told me right away. I love it when they do that.
Champion solidified your position as one of the strongest players in Yggdrasil. It gave you the ability to walk around with a piece of equipment that completely outclasses everything other than world items. and it was also exclusive to you unless a spell like Perfect Warrior was cast to enable temporary use by somebody else. Alright, now the final topic for this video is going to be on monsters and boss fights. Just like in any game, there was an aggro system built in that allowed monsters to focus on certain targets. In Yggdrasil, it was a numeric value described as hate that increases with the amount of damage you did, how much healing you were doing, what types of spell you were casting, and so on and so forth. If you were to get hit by a monster, your hate would decrease and aggro could then switch to the person with higher hate than you. Apparently, the hate value was displayed during combat, so it made it easier for players to manage the aggro. Bosses, on the other hand, came in different levels. Dungeon and raid bosses weren't impossible challenges. They were difficult, but very much beatable with a solid strategy. World enemies, on the other hand, were hidden bosses with powers on a level that could be compared to the world items. Defeating them was certainly no easy task, since their abilities could nullify resistances, and their strength rivaled legion-sized groups.
Oh, it feels sort of like layer mechanics in like 5th edition, where, you know, if you've got a monster who's got a specific lair area, the lair can also attack you. And it's like it's just not, and they can heal up, they get extra perks for being at their home. It's just not fair.
Some were even referred to as level-breaking bosses. These were monsters that had names like the Lords of the Seven Deadly Sins or the Five Rainbow Buddhas, and they were strong enough to even make the members of Nazarick hesitate when deciding whether to fight or not, though the rewards for beating them would make the fight well worth it. It was thought that beating the Lords of the Seven Deadly Sins would drop a world-class item, but being able to beat it, well, that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
Okay, and I guess that brings us to the end of Yggdrasil Part 3. Next week or so, we shall move on to some character profiles, so be sure to go vote in the community poll for which character you'd like to learn more about. I think there's some other Yggdrasil stuff that I could talk about, but I'm sure it'll come up in another video in some way or the other. There's still plenty of other topics that need to be covered as well, like guilds and the Great Tomb of Nazarick, so there definitely isn't a shortage of content. I just need to find the time to make it. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!
Awesome. Okay. Oh.
Videos within a week of each other? Damn,
I know,
it must
paused.
be Christmas or something.
Never mind. It went to the next one. I wasn't expecting autoplay to be on. It hasn't been on all day, so okay. It's fine. So yeah, next week, or like next time, we'll talk about the world's class items explained, and then we'll start going into more of the character stuff, because that seems to be what people wanted. So, and I'm curious, I hope that he tells me the story of the, I want to know. I want to know that story that he teased in this video. We'll get to it. It's fine. So thank you again so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this. I really do enjoy this background information. And if you want to see more, just go ahead and let me know in the comments. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.